What's up, everybody? We wanted to take a quick moment to remind each of you to please like, share, comment, subscribe to the podcast. Tommy,
Ring that bell.
ring the bell. It goes a long way to support the podcast. Besides that, Tommy and I offer online coaching. The links for that will be below. The link for my merch store will be below as well. And without further ado, we bring to you a Thinking Man's podcast. A Thinking Man's podcast. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of a Thinking Man's podcast. I'm your host. My name is Joseph PIRCHER. And with me, as always, my good friend Tommy Stiles. Tommy, how are you?
Good, man. It's cold. The heat's broken my apartment, so I'm bundled up.
I was wondering what the deal was, man. That's rough stuff. It's funny. It seems like the last couple of years, even these areas that are typically pretty warm get hit with some colder weather, and then the infrastructure is just not prepared for it. Like you out in Arizona, and then even being in Texas for as long as I was, man, the world just shuts down if it gets to a certain degree temperature wise. So kind of funny to see. But so big week in the industry, obviously the biggest week of the year. Coming off NPC Nationals, we just had the Olympia Expo and show. You were out there for a bit, but didn't necessarily get to see all the big boys up on stage. But I think it'd be good for us to talk about it, wrap it up. I know that people want to hear our opinions about the show. I'm sure you've gotten a bunch of messages about it. So first reaction, what'd you think? Let's talk open too. Let's talk open first.
All right. Well, if anybody listened to our prediction show, I got hosed, man. Like,
did you see? I thought about that we did a prediction show, and then I wrote up a list after that I changed my list, but I don't even remember who I put. I'm sure I have Ramy winning.
Yeah, so right off the bat, like my winner finished fifth, and that was potentially a gift too. Like he probably could have been lower.
He definitely could have
been. I mean, there's been enough speculation online already. By the time this comes out, like he just missed. I don't know. I'm not in the camp. I've heard all the different stories about it. He wasn't there. There was guys. It was a really competitive year too. I think
it was.
Previous years, that look may have carried him just because of sheer size, but not this year, man. This was an insanely competitive Olympia. Even in the lower level, you look at the guys that were like below 10th, and it's like, man, those are not bad physiques. Those all won shows this year.
Man, there's guys that didn't even get a placing that I'm impressed with. So
right.
Yeah, it was pretty disappointing to see Ramy the way that he was, because I had said all along that I thought he was going to bring like a memorable year. Like it was going to be like 2022 was the year that we remember for Ramy. Looking back on his career now, I think that we'll probably feel that way about 2020 when he first won.
Yep.
Him being his best. But also, I don't know where he goes from here. I don't know that there's any room or path forward for him. I mean, he's completely missing half of his back. Like his lats and his lower back are non-existent. And then also the arms look way downsized. Now he posted a video. I'm with you. He was off, but he posted a video, this morning or something where it's like he was 9 days out. It's a video that Dennis James took in the gym. And it almost felt like he posted it like, hey, check this out. Like I was really good at 9 days out. And even so, you see that video and I'm like, man, I don't know that the physique in this video is any better than fourth or fifth anyway. When you just have such noticeable gaps in the physique like that. And then, even people have commented on the divots in his quads, which have been there for years, but they definitely did seem worse this year. I think the big thing that I noticed with him was that his midsection, I mean, people talk about him like he's a mass monster and all this stuff, which he is. He's the biggest guy there. But also what has made him so impressive at his best is that he's also shapely. And his midsection has always been tight. It's always been a positive in his physique. And this year, he intentionally, the last couple of years, I noticed at the Olympia, will transition multiple front shots, like from like his front relaxed, front double, for example. He'll lift his midsection and almost like vacuum it, and then he goes in and crunches it and shows that look too. And anytime he did that this year with the crunch, his midsection just looked off. It looked watery. It looked wide. Um, and I think that was probably the biggest piece of it all for him. So, and then so what do you think of Hadi? I mean, Hadi steps in and finally delivers, and I shouldn't say finally delivers, but is finally rewarded and gets the
Yeah,
W.
just really complete. I think that's what separates him and Derek, because everyone was kind of like everyone jumps to Derek because of the how he looks, especially in a front double, which is one of the first shots you see. But Hadi is more complete. He has better legs from the front. Derek does have a better back and better structure from the back, but he's just not there yet. But give Derek a year of knowing he's now an open competitor and there's no more 212, that's retired. Like he can put on tissue quickly. So next year's rematch is already, I mean, but Hadi is a bodybuilder's bodybuilder, true dense muscle earned over the years. He turned pro in like 2013. Like this was not like a quick come up for him. This is, 10 years later to becoming the Olympia champion. And to be honest, I'm not going to lie. I was not following Hadi on Instagram. I just, there's too many accounts to follow. I started looking through his page last week, and the dude bangs. Like he trains like Branch Warren almost. Like he's insane with. And I just really respected it. I was like, and then I don't know the truth to this or the story behind it, but I had heard he like put his house up for sale to fund his Olympia trip this year.
Wow.
So like for this guy to win the show, and I think that the emotion he showed when he won, it wasn't just because he finally won. It was like he kind of put his life on the line to even be here in Vegas. Yeah. So I think that's really cool. And it just shows you like what belief in a dream and like hard work can achieve. And he's just complete. He was the rightful winner. Like I don't think people might have wanted Derek, but also like I don't think anybody can look at Hadi and say like he shouldn't be Mr. Olympia. That they got the
I mean, honestly, it's been coming for years now. He's Mr. Consistent, dude. Like I was at the Olympia in 2019 when he made his open debut, and I can tell you right now, he was the standout of the show. Brandon won, Bonac was second. I think the majority of the people that were there that night left feeling like he could have been crowned champion and no one would have been upset by it. 2020, I think Ramy was a clear winner. But even last year, looking at through some of the shots, like before we jumped on, I wanted to look at some of the comparisons. I think he could have won last year too. Like he's just on the money all the time. So we should have known
his stage presence too.
The way his presentation, all of it. Like he commands the stage. I heard Samson talk about this. Sorry, not Samson. I heard Mark Hector talk about this in his interview on Fuad's podcast. But he said one of the biggest hurdles that he had to overcome was that he needed to mentally start posing like a champion bodybuilder. And that's Hadi. Like from day one, that's how he's posed. He steps right up to the front, steps to the front of the line, and then bang, hits his shots like he's all emphatic and fucking confident about it. It's awesome, man. He's a pleasure to watch. I'm happy for him. Like you said, looking at Derek and the comparison, I think right now Hadi is just more complete. He's got more wow stuff going on. Like even the front double for Derek is maybe the best in bodybuilding. And even so, like you said, I could point at Hadi's quads as being better. I could point at Hadi's arms as being better in that shot. So it's just going to take time for Derek. But I think looking at Derek and knowing the whole backstory, like you said, I think if we see a full year of them just letting the governor off and fucking letting it fly, like it gets talked about a lot and people fancy themselves as being this person. But he is truly that type of person that he could come back and be 15 pounds heavier next year in the same condition. Like he just has that.
He's young too. Like
he's young. He's healthy. He's got a good head on his shoulders, man. I don't know that I predicted him very high when we spoke, and then my final list had him third because more and more I would think back to like seeing. I remember in 2019, leading up to his 212 Olympia, he was sending us photos at Animal, like leading up to the show that he wasn't posting, And at like 5 weeks out, I think it was, he sent us some shots at like 231. And I was like, just kind of floored. I was like, how the fuck is this dude going to get down to 212? There's nothing left fat wise. Like, how is he going to do this? And every year he did it, and then he would look much worse, honestly. Which, I mean, he's a top Olympia contender every year at 212 too. So I had a couple conversations with people behind the scenes that there was a couple people that were just openly doubting Derek, and I was like, man, I don't know. Like, I don't know that you guys are ready to see what this guy looks like full throttle. Um, and to his credit, he brought it. And to him, to Hani, give him credit too, because he's coaching the top two guys and the
Yeah.
top classic physique competitors. So that's pretty incredible. I've heard some people give him shit because it's like, my mother could prep Phil Heath if she was blindfolded, which might be true. But to have the top two guys, basically three of the top competitors in the entire show, hats off to him for nailing it, because I mean, we saw Ramy might be the most genetically blessed specimen that we've seen, and yet you can still swing and miss. So, yeah, all good stuff, man. Pretty exciting show. What about any other standouts, any other disappointments, or anything that you want to call out?
Um, I mean, I don't want to bag
No,
anybody,
let's
but
hear it. No, let's hear it. Come on, that's what we do.
Hunter finished exactly where I predicted him, seventh. I
Mm.
could have seen him as ninth.
I could have seen him without a fucking placing, dude.
Yeah, honestly, like it's as simple as I don't want to be a armchair quarterback from 40,000 feet away, but got to get in better shape, dude. That's and I will give huge praise to Nick Walker. If you look at his pro career so far, other than that first show, which he was basically still an amateur who was just jumping in a pro show, like New York Pro winner, Arnold Classic winner, Olympia debut, 5th place, second Olympia, 3rd place, just keeps getting better. Probably one of the only guys who was posting on Instagram all the way into the show and actually backed up the hype. It wasn't like, wow, this guy looks insane, and then he shows up completely off the mark. Like,
yeah.
I love Ian. I remember you and I
was just gonna say Ian
about a front lat spread that I sent you on Instagram. I was like, this is fucking nuts. And then it just didn't translate. And there's obviously so many variables that go into hitting your peak and posing and stage presentation and the athlete's nerves. Like, we've been on stage, like, that final 24 hours shit can go south. So,
oh yeah.
It's not as easy as, like, it just goes to show you that Instagram is smoke and mirrors. The only thing that matters is the stage. You could have been Mr. Olympia all the way through prep, looking, the way you did, and then ended up like Ian didn't even finish in the top 10.
Could you imagine what Instagram would have looked like and what he would have looked like on Instagram if it was around when Dennis James was prepping for the Olympia? Every year, everyone would be like, "This guy's gonna win. Like, this is Mr. Olympia." You see a fucking most muscular in a stringer tank top after he just blasted chest and delts, and you're like, "Whoa, this is the guy." Yeah, I have to address Ian because I'm a big like vocal supporter of Ian. I feel like publicly, and I get into some heated debates with people that don't like. He's one of these guys, you either kind of love him or you hate him, and there's a lot of people that are kind of basking in him being off at this year. And I honestly, man, looking at it, like you said, it could be peaking, whatever. But looking at his stage photos, I really don't even think that it was a matter of him not being on. I mean, he's big, he's conditioned, his color was good. I think two things for him come through on stage that you don't catch on Instagram when you're by yourself in a little box. I think that structurally, seeing some of the guys that stepped in this year, Derek, Sampson, Andrew Jacked, he's going to really struggle to make up some of that ground that he lost. I think, like you said, I think he finished 10th or 11th after being 7th after being 7th a couple times. I don't know that I see a path to him getting back into that 7th or beyond mix, because structurally it's just not that pretty. He's done a good job of filling it out. He's got a ton of muscle, and the open is still a muscle contest. But two things: his structure is not great, and then when you struggle to pose and present your physique the way that he does, it's kind of like you're kind of burning the candle at both ends. Like just thinking about like his front double, it's a pretty ugly shot structurally, and then he just looks like he's fighting himself. He really struggles to get into his shots, which structurally, of course, there's nothing you can do. But you know, if I would say this about anyone else, or I would say this to a client, there is no reason you should be stepping on the Mr. Olympia stage and looking as uncomfortable posing as he did and as some of these guys do. Like this is the height of our sport. Like if there's ever a time that you should look polished and professional, the way that Hottie does, the way that Nick did, um, it's at this show. So I when I see stuff like that, when I see guys struggling or they're not externally rotated on a front double and they're down like this, and it's like, what are you showing us? Like, did you not practice this at all? Um, so I think he's going to really struggle. I'm a fan, and I'll continue to be a fan, but I think he's going to struggle to try to make up that ground. And I think there are some guys like Andrew and Samson that are only going to continue to get better. And those are guys that present well and have incredible structure. Samson's another guy I wanted to talk about and hear your opinion about, because he got a couple cool call outs as well. Like just
man.
like besides the line, like the call outs themselves, like just in the lineup, he got a couple lucky draws. Like he stood next to Ramy for a lineup. And I think that was when people were like, holy shit, Samson's here to stay. Like he's really that big because, you know, Ramy's always just been the foregone conclusion. He's the biggest guy, but Samson looks bigger than Ramy in a lot of shots and much more like he's better put together than Ramy, at least this year. So what did you think about Samson?
I mean, just such a huge presence, just the way he walks and into a front relax is just like it's dominant. It's very like you could make him a silhouette on a shirt and it would be awesome.
Yes.
He's a little narrow in the back. I think he can make improvements there. Conditioning, and I don't know, like this was I don't know if this was his best conditioning. I think he can keep getting harder as the years go on and more muscle maturity, which will come. But that being said, like, and I think there's a lot of guys that are playing, like the open is about size. So I think as bodybuilding fans, you and I included, like we talk about condition all the time, condition. Maybe in the NPC, it's worth it to be skinned out, diced out of your mind. But for these open guys that are 250 plus on stage, maybe the fact that they could get skinned out would actually knock them down 5 placings because it is a size game too. It's open bodybuilding. You want size, like it is a muscle building contest. That is why we do bodybuilding. So for all these little internet warriors that want to talk about condition, it's like, listen, man, these guys they can't get dwarfed. Like Brandon Curry, very good, perfect example. Brandon Curry, very conditioned, polished, veteran. He's a former Mr. Olympia. Samson made him look like his son when they were next to each other in the first call out. And that's Brandon's a big guy. It's not like that just shows you how much size Samson has. So I do think, you know, there's what's the best package you can bring. Maybe it's not worth it to go for 1% more condition and lose potentially 5 pounds of fullness in the process. And I think Samson's one of those guys that could get away his whole career without ever being truly skinned out. And he could just rely on his structure, his muscle bellies, and his overall size.
That's
I would love to see him and a Mark Hector in like 3 years, and then a Quint Beastwood or whatever his last name is, Aria.
Yeah.
All 3 of those guys next to each other, that is like pure mass. With
shape. Yeah, with the shape. Yeah, exactly. I don't know that Samson, to your point, I would agree. Like, I think if that's as lean as he can get before he starts to lose some of that silhouette, well, then they probably did a good job of balancing it. And I think, like you were saying, like in the NPC and just in general, I feel like the overall essence of bodybuilding to me has always just been to be like completely skinless peeled. That always feels like in the moment of embarking on contest prep, that's the thing that's in your control. At that point, you can turn off the idea that you're building new muscle.
Right.
And at that point and any point before that, you're not changing your structure. But once you begin, yield is within your control. And I think there's something to be said for putting that on tape at some point or another. Now, once you've done that and you've been completely dug out, yeah, then you can start to play around with what looks best, what looks better, full or flat or whatever the case is. Like I'll tell you right now, I competed twice in 2021. The first show I was like maybe 4 or 5 pounds heavier, and then later in the year I competed and I was 4 or 5 pounds down and completely dug out. Best conditioning I've ever brought in my life. I kind of like the heavier look. I looked more like a bodybuilder. I was still, glutes were, lined from the outside in, but I just had a little more pop to me. So that's something like, as I get ready for next year, that's something to consider. But at the highest level of bodybuilding, I like that they've kind of gone away from it just being a ham and glute contest.
I agree.
Because it is like I like the idea that there's like a minimum standard for conditioning, but man, it's about shape and muscularity. It's about muscularity first. Like you said, it's a muscle building contest. So yeah, Samson, I was super impressed. I honestly, like you said, I could have seen Samson finish sixth. I could have seen him fifth ahead of Ramy. I could have seen him fourth ahead of Brandon, to be honest. Because I think Brandon is in similar condition. Like he's never super dug out in the glutes. His back is much better than Samson's, and that's what could be what sets him apart. But I think if Samson does improve that back, like he's going to be very tough to deal with moving forward, even for some of these guys that are up at the top right now that we've talked about, like Hottie, Nick, even Derek. All those guys are like 5'6" and under. So like if Samson improves his back and improves his conditioning a bit, man, at some point he's going to get to stand next to those guys. And I'm telling you now, don't be surprised if he looks much bigger and much better than those guys too. So we'll see. Ian was a good call out. Definitely disappointed by it, but also, this is the best Olympia lineup he's ever been a part of. So it's kind of hard to compare his other seventh place showings. And then, like you said, you kind of talk about different considerations, but with Hunter, because he's not somebody that has ever shown awesome conditioning on tape, and because he was kind of gifted fourth place last year, and just the whole story of it, like I am consistently underwhelmed with Hunter. And this is not a knock on him as a person. This is just us talking about physiques. For the hype that he gets, for the name that he has, for the placings that he's been given, I just don't see it. Hunter is a case for me that I look at as one that has me questioning my own eye and experience 10 years plus in bodybuilding, because I just don't think that I see what everybody else sees. I just don't find him to be super impressive. Like if we're talking about like on the stage, like Instagram aside, like he's consistently watery. He's consistently out of shape. And he consistently looks unprepared in terms of his posing. Like everyone's like, oh, Lee Labrada, one of the greatest posers of all time. And then we see these Instagram videos of Hunter doing all these like classic, like flowy poses. And then he gets on stage and he's sweaty and shaky and unprofessional. And it's just like, man, I don't think that he's earned all of the attention and hype that he continuously receives. So even I think he was placed seventh, like you said. Man, I could have seen him not placed.
Yeah.
Like for example, Charles Griffin was placed 14th, which, so shout out to him for even getting a number. I think Charles blew the doors off Hunter. He's a little bit smaller structurally, but man, we're talking about being peeled, complete, posing. Charles, I don't know if you saw, like he was in some of the later callouts. I don't know that I've seen an open guy hit and hold a vacuum like for 12 plus seconds in a lineup the way that Charles did, which again should go into it. Like his color was on the money. So I'm kind of just complaining here at this point. But anything else you want to wrap up on, or maybe the other divisions or anything? I mean, Sean, I thought was a clear winner in the 212. And then same thing with Chris. I think you said it best. It's like it's Chris and then everybody else.
Yeah. Sean, no chance. That was pretty much like a gavel in a courtroom, just next. And then Chris, yeah, it's Chris versus everybody else. Like, I don't care what anyone
Agreed.
says. Like, even Chris has flaws, but Chris with flaws is still night and day better than everyone else.
Yeah.
Dino, the guy who finished second, he really didn't look like he made improvements from last year, and that's because he has a weight cap. You can't make improvements when you cannot grow, and that's what people. I get in wars with these classic people sometimes because I'm like, listen, guys, it's still bodybuilding. It's the same criteria. It does
Right.
not say anywhere in the judging criteria that we want you to resemble Frank Zane and Arnold and all this shit.
Right.
So that may be like your delusional fantasy that that's what you're hoping for. But the fact that Chris is the standard, everyone's chasing Chris. What does that mean? They have to get bigger because Chris is an open
Chris is big.
bodybuilder who's
Yeah.
competing as classic.
Yeah.
He would be small in the open right now, but he could, if he didn't have the autoimmune condition and wanted to, he could push up into the open. And, he could be top 10 in a couple of years. He could be top 8.
Dude, I think he could have been top 10 this year, dude. Like, you want to talk about getting into wars with people.
Maybe.
Raphael finished 10th.
Yeah.
And he's another guy, man. He gets all this hype and all this praise. I get it's pretty. I get the Brazilians love their people.
Yeah.
But man, I'm super underwhelmed when I see Raphael. Like I heard people, I mean, Brandon Curry, like pre Olympia was like, I think Raf's going to be 5th. And I'm like, what? Like, this is another one of these scenarios where I'm like, what the fuck am I not seeing that all these guys are seeing? And then he gets on stage and he's like him. And I feel like Chris could have stood next to Raf and really pushed him.
I mean, Chris, if you do look at a side by side, Chris is probably more complete.
That's what I mean. Like his arms are better and Chris's arms are not great, but his arms are better.
Weight too. Like,
yeah,
Raphael's still, 255. I don't know what he weighs on stage, but it's just about how your body holds weight.
It doesn't even really matter. Like there's guys that Derek couldn't have been more than 235 on stage.
Right.
I mean, Hottie in 2019 was right at 212 because they weren't even sure what show he was going to do. The weight doesn't make a difference. And I think with Chris's structure and shape, when you're tall and you have shape, you're always going to look bigger than whatever the scale tells you that you are.
It's the shape is what makes you look big and bananas next to guys who don't have it.
Yeah.
And that's so what you're going to see in classic is they are going to chase size, even though they want to keep it classic. They have the weight caps. That's the only thing that will keep it controlled. Yeah. But you're going to see more and more guys who are sizing out of classic. Neil Curry's moving to the open. There's no way Dino can fucking stay in classic.
I was going to say he needs to just move up. He looks like an open bodybuilder.
Unless the IFBB increases the weight caps, which I guarantee at some point they will do when they start to see the division trending
losing
downward.
Guys.
You're losing all your heavy hitters. You can't market. Like this is a business too. And people don't realize that. Like it's a business. So what do you do? Give everybody 6 more pounds on their weight cap. Boom. It's just going to keep getting bigger. Not that
honestly, I wish that they would just take the weight cap off. What difference does it make?
Which is like you could really get into this argument. It's like classic's here to stay now because it generates too much revenue, but you could have judged bodybuilding this way from the get. You didn't need classic to do that, but that's a whole nother.
It is another conversation. I think it opens the door to more people being popular because it's like we might, like you said, if Chris wins at North Americans and becomes a pro, if classic never happens, he might just be scratching the surface at 10th place in the open right now.
Right.
So it's like there's a whole nother, like we might not know who what's the guy's name? Dino, what's the guy's real name?
I don't know.
What is the guy's name?
Ramon.
We wouldn't know who that guy is right now if there was no classic. But my thing is like, if you're so specifically judging like it's a different criteria, then why are we limiting the weight? Like if someone's too big, they're just not going to be judged appropriately.
Right. And that perfect example, like Leela Brada finished second 4 times. He would have been a classic physique champion if that was around.
Yeah.
Or at the
I think honestly,
maybe a 212 champion. There wasn't even 212 when he competed.
Right. He would have been champ. I think Lee Priest would have been a 212 champ if he was there. But
And
then
we
that's
see
a
that like
but
these
that's another guy too, Lee Priest. It's like, okay, if we were just going solely by weight, he would have made whatever the classic was. And then what is he a classic physique champion? He looks like a bodybuilder to me.
yeah, he's dense as fuck. No.
yeah, yeah,
Um
yeah,
and we see that even in the open, like Hottie was at 212 3 years ago. He's competed 212. He's Mr. Olympia in the open. Derek
yeah,
Lunsford, 212 champ last year, second in the open this year. Like
yeah.
Angel Calderon, who's still in 212, won the open.
Yeah.
Won an open
Sean won an
show.
open show at
John
178
won an open
pounds.
show. Kamal won was fourth at Tampa, which is a competitive open show. Like,
That was,
and Kamal's going to the open next year. Like,
oh, is he? Oh shit.
I
Yeah, and a
think,
bunch
yeah,
of guys. I was excited to see that Neil is going to go because they
yeah.
were saying, dude, I watched his interview on Fuad's podcast, and he showed a couple pictures where he's like ready, and it's like he's 240 something, and then he's got to get down to 215. And I have no doubt on the business side of things, like you were talking about, you're going to tell me every single one of those guys made weight. Neil was 12 pounds over the morning of weigh-ins. And his whole thing was like, oh, I'm going to stretch myself out. They're going to pull me apart and I'm going to get another inch and another 8 pounds or whatever it is. And then we don't hear from him all day. And then he posts, well, the extra inch thing didn't work, but I made 215. It's like, motherfucker, there is no way you made 215.
We talk about making bodybuilding healthier, and then we're going to get weight caps that guys like. I know what wrestlers do to make weight, man. That ain't fucking
Yeah.
healthy. MMA, like
Yeah, it's an ugly,
I've seen
it's
videos.
an ugly mark on those sports for
So,
sure.
I just don't know how long this whole weight cap thing is going to. It's probably like you see somebody have an incident, and then I guarantee you'll see a knee jerk reaction to make the weight caps heavier.
100%. As shitty as it sounds, it will take.
It's a bodybuilder's mentality to want to get bigger. That's why we all got into this. No one
it's
wants
bodybuilding. It's in the name.
Exactly.
You're right, but it's unfortunate that it will take something, either like some type of last minute Hail Mary for one of these guys to make weight and something scary happens, or it will take something less heinous, but something like Chris missing weight and then being like, whoa, hold on a second. He's the entire show. He's the reason that everyone's here. There's
already all the the speculation with the heights and how you should
That's what I mean.
have the same height at the start of the year. I mean, that to me makes sense. Like, I don't know why you have to be measured every fucking show.
Man, I think just pull it all off. Just let these guys walk up at their best, and whoever fucking wins. Like it's a different division. The criteria, like it should be judged differently. I hear you that the criteria maybe in the books are the same, but they're very clearly going for a different look. So what does it matter about the weight? Like this, they're entering classic physique. They're being judged against other classic physiques. Like if Chris all of a sudden gets, I don't know what Chris weighs. Chris, what do you think Chris weighs? Maybe 240
on stage?
Yeah.
Yeah, probably. Yeah, somewhere in 235,
like 235, 240. Okay, let's say all of a sudden he shows up. Like, is anyone going to say that he's not classic if he shows up at 250 one year? Like, no, everyone's just going to be fucking excited to see it. Like, so yeah, I think talking through this, I would love to see the guys just pulled no weight cap, like, because I would like to see Neil continue on in classic. He's got an awesome, like when I see Neil, I think that's classic shape. And Urs is another guy. Like you're going to tell me at a certain point, you're going to tell him you can't grow anymore and you just have to keep bringing the same look. Like, let's see. I think he's up next, honestly, more so even than Ramon. I would have liked to have seen Urs second.
I agree. I think Urs Bumstead is the next rivalry in that division.
Yeah.
But on the other side of the coin, the women have no weight caps in any division. So we know it can be done.
Right.
And you know what they tell the women? If a girl in women's physique like Melissa Tyke, she's the Arizona chick, they told her flat out, like she placed 8th in women's physique. They're like, you're too big. You need to move up to female bodybuilding. After prejudging, she already said on Instagram she's going to female bodybuilding. That's how you handle the men. You just tell them, hey, you're too big. Go up to this division.
Yeah.
Problem solved.
Or honestly, it would be easy in either direction. It's either, hey, you're too big, pull it back and refine your midsection, and if you want to stay here, or you're too big, if you're going to keep growing, you need to move up. We're not going to judge you in classic anymore. Like, it would just take some very clear
Feedback.
just communication. Yeah, feedback, communication
Feedback.
from the judges. Like, this is what we want. This is where we see you. Like, it would be very easy. Everyone has their own opinions, coaches, other athletes, whatever. The only opinions that matter are from the judges. So if they're telling you, hey, you're too big, you need to move up, well, then you need to move up.
Yeah.
But that I feel like they are classic, like from a business sense, they are going to start losing guys. Like even losing Neil, I think he wasn't in the top 10 because he's got to lose all this weight. And I think just a perfect Neil comes in and he's another contender in that top 8, top 6 group. And then another unspoken thing that happened this year, Logan Franklin, one of the top guys expected to do well in classic, for whatever reason, became unwell and had to pull out of the show. I don't want to speculate and guess, but I think it's a fair chance that had to do with him making some type of weight and getting sick or using diuretics or whatever the case is. And it's just it's frustrating. Just as fans, I think we just want to see guys at their best. I've been saying this about MMA for years, like in the UFC. It doesn't make any sense. You take two guys that walk around at 200 pounds and they size each other up and say, yeah, let's fight. But before we do that, let's drop 35 pounds and get to 155, weigh in, and then put all that weight back on and fight at 200. Like, it makes zero sense to me. And then there's been times where we see guys like agree to a catch weight where it's like, hey, I'm not coming all the way down to 180. Like, I'll fight you at 190. And then these guys go out and look like they're fucking superhuman because they're hydrated and healthy. So I think that's really the direction they should go in. And then one other comment I think about Classic that stood out, because I thought that we might have talked about this either on the show or maybe off air, but looking at the judging last year for Classic, it didn't make sense to me that Terrence was second, because I'm like, okay, Chris is the standard. He's tall, he's shapely, he's got this big structure. And then Terrence is 5'6", and you have him at second place. And he kind of just looks like an exaggerated 212 bodybuilder. And then third, fourth, and fifth are guys that are 6 feet plus tall. It's like, hold on a second. If we're comparing apples to apples, like, all these other guys should have placed in front of Terrence, and then he should have started his own line of placings, like from fifth down. And then so this year they went with that. They went with guys that were similarly structured, which I think I would like to see more of that in bodybuilding just in general. Like, that to me as a judge and as a bodybuilding fan, if you tell me that Chris is the standard or that Ramy is the standard, well, then everyone should be compared next to them. Like, if Ramy would have won, then we really should have been talking about, I don't know, Samson, Andrew Jack, Crizzo, like these big structured guys. James is another one. James is
not structure wise, but he's big.
No, he's tall. He's tall and big. He's another guy I wanted to comment on too, because I'm a huge fan of James, just on like a personal level, like following everything about him. Like, and he's just another guy. It feels like he's never going to be top 6 at the Olympia.
No, but not in this era. I think top 10 is the best he could do.
Yeah, but I had a conversation with someone. Someone sent me like some photos of James or something, and they were like, "Man, like, I think we're in for just another disappointing showing from James." And I'm like, by whose standards? Like, if you're talking about judging and what placing he gets, okay, I guess you're going to be disappointed if he's not in the top 10. But if like we're just talking about what he looks like and what he's bringing, this is fucking awesome. Like, you're telling me that this guy's 280 pounds and peeled out. Like, that's what I want to see at the Mr. Olympia. Like, I want to see the biggest, most freakiest guys. And so for anyone that was disappointed with what James brought, man, like, you need to go back and just look at his photos again, because it's very easy on Instagram and on NPC News to not fully understand how big these guys are. But James is someone, I think he's like 5'11", and he was like 280 on stage. That is fucking ridiculous. Anybody listening, if you've been to NPC shows, even high-level national shows, the biggest guy that you're going to see a lot of the time is like 5'8" and 220, to put that into some context for you.
Yeah, I mean, James is big, man. It's a
Yeah.
pleasure to watch. Like
Yeah.
it's
And
I
like you
just
said, he's a bodybuilder's bodybuilder, dude. He's in there clanging and banging. He eats big, he trains big. Like that's
trains
you
big, eats big, gets hairy in the off season. He's a
as a
fucking
bodybuilder, dude. Like he's someone that I want to look at and know, like, hey, you know what? Bodybuilding is still very fucking simple. Like we have all these terms and
yeah.
all this data tracking and all this stuff, and I'm as guilty of that as anybody. But man, at the end of the day, just fucking eat big, train big, and sleep a ton. And this is eventually how it can look
And do it for years. That's the
for
key point.
years and years and years.
This isn't a couple year journey, man. Like you can,
No,
some of us that have been like I've been following James since 2015
2015. Yeah.
his amateur days. Like I've
Yeah.
watched the come up. I've watched, when he was 230 on stage, 235.
And he looked thin. And that's a
Yeah.
big number. And he looked thin. Like I remember him like vying for the British finals. And it's like, yeah, like he's like 5'10, 5'11, and he was like 225, 230. And it's like, man, this guy's awesome, but he's got a lot of room to grow. And then here he is, 50 pounds of stage weight later. Like, that's a fucking hell of a journey.
Right.
Like, you want to talk about adding more human? We're talking about 50 pounds of muscle. Think about if I just pulled in fucking 50 pounds of muscle tissue in a sack and dropped it on this table right here. You would be like, what the fuck is this? What the fuck? Or think about it as meat or fucking actual muscle, what that shit would look like.
Tissue.
Like that's yeah, dude, it would be gross in the best way. It would be like, what the fuck is this? And then you're talking about somebody adding that to their human. Like that's some crazy shit, dude.
For those that don't know how the scoring works, if you get 16th place, that's last. Everybody gets 16th.
Everybody's tied for 16th.
But James was the real true 16 because he was, if you look at the scorecard, his total was 159, not 160, like everyone else. So if I were James, I would monetize the fuck out of that. I would make shirts that say the true 16 or I am the real 16.
Hell yeah.
Like, because
that's a good eye. I didn't look at all
this in this lineup. That's you had
100%.
Antoine, 16th show winner. Blessing, maybe a loudmouth, but did win 2 shows.
Won 2 shows. Yeah.
Yeah. Like there's a lot of the 16s. Joel Thomas, an absolute tank, 16th. Like
big human.
Some dudes that you could have had a show.
Dude, Muhammad Shaban tied for 16th.
Yeah. You could have had a show with just the 16s, and that would have been a damn good open show. Like this was a deep Olympia.
Now, how do you feel about that, though, with all these guys? Because watching through the live stream, and just logistically, I knew that this would be the case, but I don't feel like a lot of those guys get a great look. Now, that's dog eat dog. Like, you need to catch the eyes and earn a call out. But also, that's them going through a lot of shit. That's guys that prepped most of the year then to win other pro shows and then qualify. So what's your take on how many guys got there? I understand it was a little bit of a different year because they were doing shows to qualify at the end of last year and all this different stuff because of COVID. But what's your take on that? How would you like to see 30 guys deep or something more concise?
I think I would like. It's not that I have an issue with 30 guys. Maybe you could tighten it up some. Maybe only 1 points winner versus 3. But I think you could also. I think every division needs to be tightened up because the overall production, it's a long fucking 2 or 3 days. Like it's way
too much, dude.
Long.
Yeah.
And when you're talking about holding peaks for open guys, like it matters. Like minutes matter. To the look we're going to see on the stage under the lights. I think at the NPC level, like, dude, just, you really don't need to do much. You're probably going to be all right. But when you're talking about 280 pounds of fucking muscle, their metabolisms are churning. We could see a guy who is full 5 minutes too long of knowing when his stage time is, he's flat or he's flattening out as we speak. Like you watch guys change on stage as they're posing.
Oh, so yeah.
I do think more preference needs to be given to giving the open guys a more concise, clear, like this is when you're on stage, this time exactly. And like, we're going to get everybody in by this time. So give these guys the opportunity to nail their peaks to the best of their ability so the fans can see the best of the best at their best, and then let it go from there. I think guys like Jay, like any of the 16s probably didn't get as much stage time as obviously the top callouts, but is that kind of how it goes?
Man, I would take a more drastic approach. Like if tomorrow my last name was Mannion and I got to make these decisions, I would make it so that only 16 qualify for the Olympia in every class. Like make it that firm number, 16. It's prestigious to even get there. Like, because I think that's what's missing. Like, we're hearing about there was 35 open guys, there was 50 plus in classic. Like, is this really the Super Bowl of bodybuilding when everybody in the division makes it? Like,
I think it's challenging with
I get there's promoters and they want to make money. We're
in America and we have a plethora of shows, and like the European circuit's kind of its own thing.
Yeah.
And even the analyst side of it, like I feel like analysts can't cover Europe as well as they can cover America, because it's just like it's not a different world, it's one world, but it's also like it's across the seas, it's different time zones.
No, it is like it's a different world.
So I think the international bodybuilding, I mean, the Middle East, Iran, like all of the Kuwait, all those guys, I don't even know half their names sometimes until they win a show. And I'm like, oh, who's this guy? Let me look at him.
What the fuck is this?
You know what I mean? Like there's so much talent across the globe now that I think it is. And then you got to bring in visas and getting to this country to compete.
Yeah.
There's a lot of shit people have to go through. So I think I'm with you on like, let's make it elite of the elite. Yeah. But it's also like you almost have to make a better system of how the other shows are going to be set up then.
Oh, like 100%. It would take a completely league-wide,
almost like a playoff system.
It would take like a league-wide, that's interesting. It would take like a league-wide effort, a coordinated effort though to do it. Like, okay, these are the 8 shows that if you want to qualify for the Olympia, you have to be at. And I think we would see a way elevated standard at all of these shows. Like you wouldn't see the Indie Pro with guys placing third that you never heard of. Like it would all be heavy hitters. I think prize money would be up then. They would be able to monetize. I think
you could make the whole thing points related then if you wanted to do it. Because then,
well, then right that would force. So instead of a win being automatic, you would have to do one of two things. If wins are going to continue to be automatic, there has to be less shows, which I don't think is an option. I think people want to make money. They want to promote shows. So then in your case, in that example, then if there's still going to be 30 shows across the year, I like your idea where it is just points. Like, yeah, you have 15 points for a win, on down from whatever.
Top 16 guys with points get in.
Right. Like, what have you done over the course of the year? And then I think too, you could do something where some of these other shows count for more. Maybe New York Pro counts for twice as much as anything else. The Arnold counts more than anything else. And I think too, I would like to see a reduction in the automatic bids, like from the Olympia. I think the top 3 would be cool. Automatically, you're qualified for next year. But a lot of the time, like how cool would it be to have to see Brandon Curry and Ramy next year qualify again? I think it would be awesome. I think it would draw more fans in. It would elevate the standard of these other shows like we're talking about.
Brandon usually does. I mean, other than the year he won, I think like Brandon.
He usually is pretty active. Like he usually will jump into an Arnold.
I mean, it's money. Why not go for it? You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, he said that. He said that last year that there was no plan to do the Arnold because he was qualified for the Olympia. And then he said that, they came out and they made the prize money $200,000. And I told my wife I was leaving that minute and going to Kuwait to prep for the show. And he went and he won.
That's one day's, well, not one day's work, but that's one day you're getting paid that. Like, that's kind of hard.
Yeah. I mean, you're doing the work all year anyway.
There's an expiration date on when you're going to have payday options like that in the future, especially for him. He's at the end. Like, I think at this point for Brandon, obviously he's still going for the Olympia, but at the same time, I'd be looking to stack as much money as I can. my last
I'm
one
with
is
you, man.
years.
Especially like, those guys that are solidified at the top at this point should be looking at their careers like they're prize fighters. Like, how much money can I make from this every time I step on stage? Um, and then
Kind of like
also like
MMA.
when you're yeah, and when you're that good, man, I hear the argument like, oh, you can't expect these guys to peak 3 or 4 times a year. I get that if you're using some crazy diuretic protocol. A lot of these guys are good enough and big enough to just get ready ahead of time and then not use diuretics. If that's the case, man, if I was Brandon Curry, I would be competing at every show. Like, we hear these old time guys talking about it all the time. And I don't necessarily agree with a lot of their like old school bitter bullshit that they put out about the current competitors. But one thing I do agree with is how often these guys are competing. Like, if I was good enough, that I didn't need long off seasons and I was at the top of the sport, I would be doing every show. I would do every single show. There would be no reason not to be, especially like I'm not someone that uses diuretics, so I would just show up and eat the same food that I always do and show up and get a pump and fucking go out on stage and try to set my legacy. Like, a lot of these guys in the 90s, like Milos, even those guys competed like 70, 80 fucking shows. Like, Dexter won 30 shows. How many shows do you have to do to win 30 of them? Like, he had to have done 100 plus shows.
I think Dorian did like 17 total.
Right, and won like 15 of them or something.
Maybe not, I don't even know that many.
No, it was something like that. I think he entered maybe 15 or 16 and only didn't win 2 of them. His first Olympia and I guess his first Night of Champions, where he was second in both.
Yeah.
But anyway, we were going to get into something else, and then we just did an hour on the Olympia. So do you want to just wrap this? We should give the other topic that we talked about its own thing, and then that can be the next segment in that series that we do then.
Yeah. I mean, I knew this would kind of just carry itself for an hour. I could talk for 2 hours about this, but people forget it's a business too. Like, it's not like we're fans at the same time, but you also have to understand, like, IFBB's got to make money, competitors got to make money. And real quick on the topic of the older guard kind of shit talking the newer guard, like, as someone who looks at that neutrally, like, first of all, I understand social media creates an environment where you have to somehow stay relevant. And a lot of these older guys may be feeling like they need to do that. A lot of the older guys that competed 30 years ago, that doesn't just mean like the IFBB doesn't give you a severance package and you're good for life. Like, a lot of them may be living paycheck to paycheck.
They're broke. A lot of these guys are broke.
So they're struggling. They're trying to find relevancy and get some attention to maybe whatever they're selling or whatever shit scheme they have. But I just think we see that in all walks of life, where like
we do
the older contingent of anything talk shit about the newer.
Back in my day. Yeah.
It's, I walked to school backwards uphill in the snow.
In the snow, both ways, maybe.
You get a bus and you get a car. Like, I heard it from my dad growing up. So I think it's to be expected, but also like you have guys from the same eras of the guys talking shit who are like doing things to still improve bodybuilding and giving feedback. Right.
Milos is a good example. And Chris Cormier. Yeah.
Chris Cormier. A lot of these guys, like Jay Cutler, is still involved with so many different athletes across all the different divisions. So I just think
he goes and shows his face at the Olympia for 10 hours shaking hands. Like that alone is helping to improve bodybuilding.
Well, it's like when I hear an Arnold critique, I'm like, dude, you haven't competed in 1980, 43 years coming up. Like, I don't care about what you have to say.
I roll my eyes at Arnold, dude. Yeah. Like I respect him. I respect what he is for bodybuilding.
He's influenced, but also like,
you
haven't sat on a judging panel in what, decades, dude?
Right.
You were around in like,
and he says the same shit. It's like, dude, no one gives a fuck about the calves. Like, and then also like he talks like
not to the point where they're making or breaking placings. Like,
right. And he talks like he had like if Tom Platz wanted to really harp on having great calves to improve your physique, okay, I'll listen to Tom Platz. Arnold had dog shit calves. Like, what are like these guys? Like, man, it drives me nuts. Like, guys, like right now, like Barry DeMay has made a post about how nobody has a lower back and all this stuff. It's like, dude, one, the quality of the technology, like everybody looked fucking great on this grainy old school bullshit cameras. Like everyone looks like they're peeled from 1,000 feet away. Like you get the highest 8K fucking crazy quality shit. Yeah, you're gonna see more flaws. You're gonna see less of what you want to see. But that's just life. And my big argument when anytime I hear any of these old school guys, and again, I'm a like we've talked about, we're historians of bodybuilding. I love bodybuilding. Um, but you're going to put yourself in the line of fire when you say stupid shit, because a lot of these guys that are coming out and talking would not like all, and especially a lot of these guys, old school guys, come out and say shit and they're like, oh, everyone gets a pro card now, everyone this, nobody's in shape, nobody trains hard, and all this stuff. It's like, buddy, I promise you, no one would know your name if you were coming up today. Like a lot of these guys, like there are some timeless physiques and timeless competitors. Like I think regardless of weight, Flex Wheeler does well in any generation. Dorian does well. Ronnie does well. But other than that, man, a lot of these guys that like one big shot, like Arnold doesn't place top 10 even in Classic this past year. And like
No.
that's the guy that Classic is mirrored around, and he doesn't like look at like Wesley Vissers is like an improved modern version of Arnold's physique, and he's like eighth or ninth. Like that's 30 pounds heavier than whatever Arnold was.
And he's
But
just
he's
an
old,
underdeveloped open bodybuilder. He just
right? That's all it is.
he
But
doesn't
these
have it.
guys, man, talk shit, and like it happens in other sports and stuff too, like you said. But that just tells me that this is someone that 30 years after their prime has yet to absolve their ego to where they still feel like they need to talk about like, oh no, but if I was competing today, like I would be this or I would be that. It's like, no, like let's look at it for what it is. Like you would be a nobody. Nobody would know who you are. Like the guys today are bigger, harder, they train better, they know how to use gear better. Like all these things have evolved. And it's just something I wanted to call out because I hope I never get to that point. Like, yeah, we talk about some of the downfalls of this current generation, but also like the end product is that the guys that were on stage this past weekend at the Olympia are better than anything that we've ever seen. And 5 years from now, they'll be better than this year. So I
Right.
just have an appreciation more so for people. Like I have to say, man, I was not a huge, excuse me, I was not a huge Phil Heath fan during his reign. I appreciated the physique, but I didn't necessarily love the way he interacted with people. And then now he's almost he's almost stolen a page out of Jay's playbook where he's kind of taken on this ambassador role because he did the commentary. I don't know if you noticed, but I thought he did a great job because he made it a point to point out the positives of all the physiques, which I think is like when Sean Ray does the commentary, we miss out on that. Like I get you want to be critical and you want to point out like, hey, this is what's preventing them from being the best. But also there's a lot of people watching outside of just the people that know bodybuilding. And it's like we want to present these athletes in a positive light. And I have to give credit to Phil Heath for that because he did that in the commentary. And then online, after all this other bullshit has gone on, I've seen him commenting like, we need to be talking positively about every generation. Like, there's no reason for us to be doing this. And that's someone who admittedly had maybe one of the biggest egos of all time. And he's been able to set that aside and talk positively about what's going on now. So I just wish more guys would do that.
Well, Phil's affiliated with my hormone clinic, Transcend. So he was at my booth. I was at the Olympia Expo working, and I'm going to be real. Phil Heath had the longest line of anybody at the expo to take pictures with.
Wow.
Now, Sean Clarita was also at the Mutant booth, just right across the way, and like I could walk up to him at any point. He never had a line. That's what I'm talking. Like when you talk about like where you stand in the industry, a dude who is a 7-time champ, and his last showing wasn't great in 2020. Right. It still has a line around the fucking building, and he has bodyguard. Like Transcend had people walking him around to prevent people from like getting to him while he was walking. Like that shows you the 180 he did, because he was egotistical as a competitor, very sensitive.
Yep.
blocked people left and right online if they
Yeah.
didn't said something he didn't like. But he has embraced Jay Cutler's role, and he's probably easily more like now than he was as champion.
Oh,
But also, I
100%.
think in hindsight, we can see how dominant he truly was, because
Oh, yeah.
we talk about how competitive this year's Olympia was. I don't see anybody up there who can rattle off 7 in a row. Hottie's not going to do it. I
No.
think he might get 2 or 3 tops. I don't think
Yeah.
there's anybody up there who will start a reign like we saw with Ronnie or Phil or Dorian. I think bodybuilding has just gotten too close, and there's no, right now anyway, there's no clear cut guy like, this is the guy. He's going to dominate every year for the next half decade. Like, I just
Which
don't
I
see it.
appreciate,
I
because
love it.
it makes you feel like how it should be. Like on any given day, if you just show up and you're the best, regardless of your Instagram following, regardless of how many times you've won, I think that was a little bit of a flaw by the Olympia just at large over the years. Like they always wanted like a reigning champion. And it's cool. It adds to the history of bodybuilding. It adds to like the mystique of those eras. Um, but recently I like the idea that, okay, Hadi Chupan, he just shows up and he's the best for those 2 days. Well, then guess what? He's the champion, deservingly so. But to your point, looking back, that I wonder if that was part of why Phil wasn't so loved in the moment, because you become part of the furniture when you're just a no doubt champion every year. Like as a fan, it was almost a bummer. Like I was never excited for Phil's Olympias like I was for this year, where it's like, man, where is everybody going to be? This guy could be second. This guy could
Yeah.
be eighth.
Well,
Like
think
every
about
year, it was just like Phil's going to blow the doors off everybody. And then I don't know, whoever fills in after that, so be it.
I think it's knee-jerk reaction to hate the GOAT. Like, people hate
For
Tom
sure.
Brady because he's
Yes.
got fucking 6 rings.
And he's almost, not to get off the rails with this, but he's so far beyond anything else that he's started receiving his flowers the way that Phil Heath has, but he's still playing. Like he's just played so long that he's lived long enough to be the fucking gone from the villain to the people's champ. But that's awesome to hear about Phil. How's he looking in person? He's still pretty fucking big, huh?
Oh, yeah, his arms are still
His
like,
arms. Yeah.
yeah. You could look at him and be like, oh, you're getting on stage tomorrow, right? Like, just,
Yeah.
and probably not doing anything, like guaranteed not running anything to look like that. That's life, baby.
Yeah.
But he's cool, man. He was taking pictures of everyone and interacting, and like he was working.
That's awesome.
Like, the expos work when you have to talk to hundreds of people. And I think I was the same way. Like every year Phil won, I was like, oh yeah, cool, Phil won.
Yeah.
Looking back and being able to be objective, like I don't see any year where he wasn't the true winner though. Like he truly was. It wasn't like they cemented him in and said, you're our guy. Like no one beat him.
Right.
No one beat him in his 7-year run. At least that, like,
I went back and looked recently, and I think the only year that I could have an argument actually would have been 17 with Ramy. Because that I look back, that might have been Ramy's best, dude. Like we didn't talk about it in the moment maybe as much, and social media wasn't as big.
Yeah.
I know it's not something you have off the top of your head, but go back and take a look, because like when you compare that Ramy to, like, I don't know, 2020 or 2021 when he won, he had more left. Like there was more of his back, more of his arms. He's still peeled. And that was the beginning of the end for Phil's midsection, but I'm splitting hairs. I get the point. Like Phil was as dominant of a champion as we've ever had. And it wasn't for lack of competition. I mean, that era was fucking stacked. You're talking about Kai Green,
Dennis Wolf,
Sean Roden, like all these. Rolly Winkler was always up there. Like there's tons of very, very, very good Olympia quality guys.
Dude,
I mean,
Dennis
even
Wolf
just
talk about a physique, man.
Dude, that's, man, fuck.
He ran into a hard eras. Like he was,
oh yeah.
What, 07 was his Olympia debut, and it's like 07 you run into, Victor Martinez was sick that year. Jay Cutler beat Victor that year. So like Dennis kind of he got the end of Jay Cutler's reign into Phil Heath's reign.
Right
and
into
then
Phil.
Irene came up, and it was just like Man,
Yeah.
he was right there. That could have been a Mr. Olympia had a
Oh,
couple
that's a
pounds out of
Mr.
it.
Olympia caliber physique, more so even than a lot of the guys that we say are uncrowned.
Right.
Like we're talking about Dennis being 6'1", 270 plus on stage, like not missing anything, always in
German
shape,
muscle, dude.
always popping full. One of my all-time favorites. Like I never would have had an argument for him winning an Olympia. And that one year that he beat Sean as the final two for the Arnold was one of the coolest experiences that I've ever seen as a fan. So, man, we could probably talk bodybuilding and the history of the Olympia and all this shit for hours. I need to eat.
Yeah.
So we're gonna go. But thanks to everybody that continues to support the show. I know that we were late with the drop this past week. That's what happens sometimes when you put out a free show. Sometimes you're a day late. So we appreciate everybody following along, though. For Tommy Stiles, I'm Joseph PIRCHER. This was a Thinking Man's podcast. And until next time, guys, we're out. A Thinking Man's podcast.